The great hall of the Vorthok Empire stretched as far as the eye could see. Its black stone walls rose high into darkness, decorated with the skulls of 1,000 conquered species. Each skull told a story of victory, of another world that had fallen before the might of the Vorthok war machine. Commander Hugh stood before the War Council, his massive frame casting long shadows across the polished floor. Like all Vorthok, he towered over 8 feet tall, his body covered in natural armor, plates that had turned dark red from countless battles. His 4 arms ended in razor-sharp claws that could slice through steel, and his eyes glowed with the fierce amber light that marked a true warrior of his people. The council chamber was filled with the greatest military minds of the Vorthok Empire. These were the beings who had conquered half the known galaxy in just 3,000 years. They had crushed the crystal cities of Atlanter. They had burned the forest worlds of the Grinkin. They had hunted the sky dancers of Nimbus Prime to extinction. No species had ever stood against them and survived. Report on Sector 7749, commanded Council Leader Vorthok Prime. His voice like grinding stone, Hugh stepped forward and activated the holographic display. A small blue and green world appeared in the center of the chamber, spinning slowly in the artificial light. It looked peaceful, almost beautiful, with white clouds swirling over vast oceans and green continents. The target world is called Earth, Hugh began, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. It orbits a yellow star in what the locals call the Sol System. Intelligence reports indicate a single dominant species, called humans. Murmurs of interest rippled through the assembled warriors. New prey was always exciting news. "What are their capabilities?" asked War Master Vex, leaning forward in his battle throne. Huck's mandibles clicked together in what passed for a smile among his people. "Minimal. Our scouts report they are soft-skinned bipeds with no natural weapons. No claws, no fangs, no armor plating. They cannot even survive in their own atmosphere without artificial coverings." Laughter echoed through the chamber. The idea of a species so weak they needed artificial skin was almost too ridiculous to believe. "Their technology level?" inquired another council member. "Primitive. They have achieved basic spaceflight, but have not spread beyond their own system. Their largest vessels are smaller than our scouts. Their weapons appear to be crude projectile launchers and simple energy beams. Nothing that could threaten even our oldest ships." Hugh manipulated the display to show images captured by their spy drones. The humans appeared exactly as described, small and fragile-looking. They walked on only 2 legs, had thin skin that looked like it would tear easily, and possessed only 2 arms ending in soft appendages with no claws at all. "How many worlds do they control?" asked the Prime. "Just 1. They seem incapable of true expansion. Some small outposts on nearby dead rocks, but nothing that could be called colonies. They appear to be a species that stays close to home." This brought more laughter from the council. A species that could not even leave its birth world was hardly worth the fuel it would cost to reach them. Military strength? Hugh accessed another file. "Our best estimates suggest they have perhaps a few hundred combat vessels total. Their ground forces number in the millions, but they appear to fight, primarily among themselves. Internal conflict is constant. They cannot even unite their own species, much less pose a threat to others." The War Master nodded approvingly. "Excellent. A divided enemy is a defeated enemy." "How long since they achieved spaceflight?" "Less than 100 of their years," Hugh replied. "They are infants compared to most spacefaring races." Council. Leader Vorthok Prime stood from his throne, his massive form dominating the chamber. His armor bore the marks of 1,000 battles, and his eyes held the cold fire of absolute authority. "Then it is decided. The human homeworld will be our next conquest. Commander Hugh, you will lead the first fleet to claim this prize. Use only minimal force. A species this weak hardly deserves the full might of our empire." Hugh bowed deeply. His 4 arms crossed over his chest in the traditional salute. "It will be my honor, Prime. How many ships should I take?" "A battle group should be sufficient. Perhaps 50 vessels. Do not waste resources on creatures that cannot even defend themselves properly." The decision was met with approval from the assembled council. 50 ships was barely a patrol force by Vorthok standards, but it was more than enough to conquer most worlds they had encountered. For a species as primitive as the humans appeared to be, it was probably excessive. "There is one thing," Prime Hugh said, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. "The humans have been sending communication signals into space. Not distress calls or challenges, but something they call music and art. They seem to believe other species might find these things interesting." This brought a new round of laughter from the council. The idea that any species would waste energy sending artistic expressions to potential enemies was almost beyond comprehension. "Art and music," the Prime's voice dripped with contempt. "What use are such things to a warrior race? Do they perhaps hope to defeat us with pretty sounds and colorful pictures?" "It appears so, Prime. They seem to believe in something they call peaceful contact. The concept appears to mean meeting other species without immediate combat." The chamber fell silent for a moment as the council tried to process this information. The idea of meeting another species without fighting was so alien to the Vorthok mindset that it was difficult to understand. "Truly, they are the weakest species we have ever encountered," the War Master finally said. "They will make excellent slaves once we have demonstrated their proper place in the galaxy." Hugh nodded his agreement. In 3,000 years of expansion, the Vorthok had never encountered a species that actively sought peaceful contact with strangers. Every other race had at least tried to fight, even if their efforts had been futile. These humans seemed to have skipped the natural development of warrior instincts entirely. "Prepare the first fleet," ordered the Prime. "We depart within one rotation. This conquest should take no more than a few days. Perhaps we can be back in time for the victory celebrations of the Andromedus campaign." As the council began to disperse, Huck remained behind to study the images of Earth and its inhabitants. Something about these humans puzzled him, though he could not put his finger on what it was. They looked so fragile, so helpless, yet they had survived long enough to achieve spaceflight. That suggested some level of competence, even if it was not immediately obvious, but such thoughts were quickly dismissed. The evidence was clear. Humans were weak, divided, and had no concept of proper warfare. They would fall like all the others, and the Vorthok Empire would grow stronger still. Within hours, the Great War Fleet began to move toward the distant Blue World, carrying with it the confident expectations of easy victory and the absolute certainty that no species in the galaxy could stand against the might of the Vorthok Empire. They had no idea that they were about to meet the deadliest species the galaxy had ever produced. The Earth Federation vessel Harmony drifted through the void at the edge of human space, its white hull gleaming in the light of distant stars. Inside the ship, diplomat Minji checked her appearance one final time in the mirror of her quarters. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional style, and she wore the formal blue uniform of the Federation Diplomatic Corps. Today would make history. She had studied every theory about alien contact, learned 17 different greeting protocols, and practiced peaceful negotiation techniques until she could perform them in her sleep. The cargo hold of the Harmony was filled with the finest examples of human culture. Paintings by master artists, recordings of beautiful music, books containing the greatest stories ever written, and samples of foods from every corner of Earth. "Ambassador Minji, to the bridge," came the voice of Captain Woojin over the ship's communication system. Minji took a deep breath and made her way through the corridors of the Harmony. The ship was not a warship, but a vessel of peace, designed specifically for diplomatic missions. Its crew of 47 were all volunteers who believed in humanity's mission to reach out to the stars with open hands instead of closed fists. The bridge, Captain Woojin, stood looking out at the massive shapes that had appeared on their sensors. Weapons even when they were just floating in space. "How many ships?" Mingi asked, trying to keep her voice steady. 53 vessels, replied Lieutenant Hyungu from the sensor station. "The smallest one is twice the size of our largest battleship. The biggest one is, well, it's bigger than anything we've ever built." Mingi nodded. The size difference was intimidating, but she reminded herself that bigger did not always mean hostile. Perhaps these aliens simply built large because they were large themselves. "Any response to our greeting signals?" she asked. "Nothing yet," said Communications Officer Su Jin. "They're definitely scanning us, but they haven't returned any of our standard peaceful contact messages." Mingi walked to the center of the bridge and straightened her uniform. "Open a channel. All frequencies." The main screen flickered to life, showing the massive alien fleet hanging in space like a collection of metal predators. Mingi took another. deep breath and began the greeting she had practiced hundreds of times. "This is Ambassador Minji of the Earth Federation, Vessel Harmony. We carry gifts of art, music, and knowledge as tokens of our desire for peaceful relations. We hope that this moment marks the beginning of a long and beneficial friendship between our species." For several minutes, there was only silence. Then the communication system crackled to life, and a voice like grinding stone filled the bridge. The words hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. This was not how first contact was supposed to go. Mingi felt her heart sink, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I believe there may be some misunderstanding," she replied. "We are not here to fight. We are diplomats seeking peaceful contact. Perhaps we can discuss our mutual interests and find common ground." The response was immediate and terrifying. 3 beams of brilliant energy lanced out from the alien fleet, striking the 2 escort ships that had accompanied the Harmony. The human vessels, the Courage and the Hope, disappeared in expanding balls of fire and debris. On the bridge of the Harmony, alarms began screaming. The crew stared in horror at the destruction of their sister ships. 96 human beings had just died in the space of seconds. "Shields up," shouted Captain Woojin. "All hands to battle stations." But the Harmony was not a warship. Its shields were designed to protect against space debris and radiation, not military-grade weapons. When the alien ships opened fire again, the defensive systems failed almost immediately. The ship shuddered as alien forces boarded through the breached hull. Mingi could hear the sounds of fighting in the corridors as the crew tried to resist the invaders. The sounds were brief. Whatever these aliens were, they were efficient killers. The bridge doors exploded inward. The aliens were enormous, standing over 8 feet tall and covered in what looked like natural armor. They had 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws, and their eyes glowed with a cold amber light that spoke of intelligence and cruelty. The leader of the boarding party stepped forward, and Mingi realized this must be the commander of the alien fleet. His armor was more elaborate than the others, marked with symbols that probably indicated rank and honors won in battle. "I am Commander Hugh of the Vorthok Empire," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from the depths of his chest. "You are now prisoners of war." "We are not at war," Minji replied, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "We came here in peace. We wanted to be friends." Huck's mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. "Friends? You speak of friendship with the Vorthok Empire. We do not have friends. We have subjects and enemies. You will learn the difference." Captain Woojin stepped forward, placing himself between Mingi and the alien commander. "If you want prisoners, take me. Leave my crew alone. They're just doing their jobs." Hugh looked at the human captain with something that might have been curiosity. "Interesting. You offer yourself to protect others. This is not behavior we have seen from conquered species before." "Maybe that's because you've never met humans before," Woojin replied. The alien commander gestured to his warriors, and they seized the captain, Hugh said. "Then observe and learn." What happened next would haunt Mingi for the rest of her life. With casual efficiency, the alien warriors began executing members of the Harmony's crew. They worked their way through the bridge personnel methodically. Even as the alien warrior raised his claws, the captain's last words were a warning. "Tell Earth," he gasped. "Tell them what's coming." Mingi found herself alone on the bridge with Commander Hugh and his warriors. Bodies lay scattered around. The blood of good people who had only wanted to bring peace to the galaxy. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you kill them? They never hurt anyone." Huck studied her with those glowing amber eyes. "To demonstrate the price of resistance, your species will learn that defiance of the Vorthok Empire, but we weren't resisting. We came in peace." "Peace is a luxury for the strong," Hugh replied. "Your species is weak. You will serve or you will die. There are no other options." The alien commander activated a device on his wrist, and images appeared in the air above it. Mingi could see Earth, beautiful and blue. "Within days, your military will fall, your cities will burn, and your people will kneel before the might of the Vorthok Empire. You will live to see this happen, so that you may tell the survivors what happens to species that dare to believe they can stand as equals with their betters." As the alien warriors dragged her away to a prison cell, Mingi's mind raced. She had to find a way to warn Earth. The quantum communication relay in the Harmony's computer core was still active. If she could reach it, she could send a message back to Federation Command, but even as she planned her escape, a part of her wondered if it would matter. The alien fleet was massive, their technology advanced, and their experience in conquest clearly extensive. What could humanity do against enemies who had been conquering worlds for thousands of years? She thought about the gifts in the cargo. Hold, the art and music and literature that was meant to show the beauty of human culture. As the prison cell door slammed shut behind her, Ambassador Mingy began to pray that someone on Earth would receive her warning in time to mount a defense. But deep in her heart, she feared that humanity was about to learn what it meant to face the deadliest species in the galaxy. And somewhere in the ship's computer core, history. Admiral Gin-ho stood in the command center of Earth Defense Station Alpha, staring at the holographic display that showed the death of the Harmony. The quantum relay had transmitted everything in perfect clarity. He had watched Ambassador Mingy's peaceful greeting, seen the destruction of the escort ships, witnessed the cold-blooded murder of 47 good people who had only wanted to make friends with the stars. "Sir, we're receiving reports from the outer colonies," said Communications Officer. "Unit B alien fleet has split into smaller groups. They're attacking our settlements." Gin-ho clenched his fists. The images of Captain Woojin's death played over and over in his mind. "Send the code red alert to all human worlds. Full military mobilization. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon we have." "Sir, what about the diplomatic protocols? Shouldn't we try to negotiate?" The Admiral turned to look at the young officer. His eyes were cold as space itself. "They already gave us their answer, Lieutenant. They killed our diplomats. There's nothing left to negotiate." Far from Earth, on the mining colony of New Sol, the warning arrived just as the first ships appeared in the sky. Do-yeon looked up from his work at the deep core mining station and saw the massive alien vessels descending through the atmosphere like metal. THUNDERCLOUDS. The colony's defense force numbered exactly 12 people with outdated weapons. The fleet had 30 warships. "Everyone to the shelters," ordered Colony Administrator Kung Soo over the emergency broadcast system. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." But Do-yeon didn't head for the shelters. Instead, he ran toward the mining control center. As the colony's chief engineer, he knew every system, every explosive charge, every weak point in the massive mining operation that had carved deep into New Sol's crust over the past 15 years. The Vorthok ground forces landed in the colony's main square, their heavy boots crushing the flowers that the colonists had planted around the fountain. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. Weapons ready but not particularly concerned about resistance from a mining colony, that was their first mistake. Do-yeon's fingers flew over the mining control systems as he watched the aliens spread out through the colony. The deep core charges were designed to break apart solid rock. There were enough explosives in the mining shafts to level half a mountain. "Attention Vorthok forces," he said into the colony's broadcast system. "This is Chief Engineer Do-yeon. You came here to conquer our world. You killed our people who came to you in peace. Now you're going to learn something about humans. We don't like bullies." The Vorthok commander tried to respond, but Do-yeon had already cut the communication line. His finger hovered over the detonation switch. He thought about his wife back on Earth, about the children who played in the colony gardens, about the friends who had welcomed him to this distant world with open arms. "See you in hell," he whispered, and pressed the button. The explosion could be seen from orbit. The entire mining complex disappeared in a ball of fire that reached into the sky like a massive fist. 3 Vorthok destroyers, caught too close to the blast, were pulled down by the shock wave and debris. The colony was gone. But so were 2,000 Vorthok soldiers and their ships. On the agricultural world of Hanbit, Farmer Soyen received the news of New Sol's destruction with grim satisfaction. The Vorthok were learning that humans didn't surrender easily. Her world was different from the mining colony. Hanbit was covered in vast fields of grain and fruit trees, rolling hills that stretched to the horizon under a gentle blue sky. Colonists here were farmers, not miners. They grew food, not weapons. But Soyen had not always been a farmer. 20 years ago, she had been Lieutenant Soyan of the Earth Marines, trained in combat tactics and guerrilla warfare. She had come to Hanbit to find peace, to grow things instead of destroying them. That peace was about to end. The Vorthok forces that landed on Hanbit expected easy conquest. Their intelligence reports showed a population of farmers and their families, with no military installations and minimal defensive capabilities. What they found instead was a carefully planned resistance that used every inch of the familiar. Terrain to deadly advantage. Soyan had spent the hours after receiving the warning, turning farm equipment into weapons and organizing the colonists into fighting units. The irrigation systems became channels for explosive devices. The grain silos became sniper positions. The peaceful fields became a maze of hidden traps and ambush points. The Vorthok had superior weapons and armor, but they had never fought an enemy that knew the land like their own backyard. When they advanced through the wheat fields, hidden explosives took out their vehicles. When they tried to use their air support, guided missiles launched from concealed positions in the hills brought down their aircraft. How are they doing this? Demanded Vorthok Ground Commander, Vex, as his forces took heavy casualties from enemies they couldn't even see. The intelligence reports said these were farmers. His communications officer looked up from his station. "Sir, we're intercepting human radio chatter. It appears their leader was formerly a military officer." Vex snarled in frustration. The humans were using tactics he had never encountered before. They didn't stand and fight in formations like honorable warriors. Instead, they struck from hiding, inflicted damage, and disappeared before his forces could respond. But it was the children that truly disturbed the Vorthok forces. 12-year-old Tai Young had been playing in the colony's maintenance yard when the aliens landed. He had watched his parents die, trying to protect the evacuation convoy. Now he sat in the cockpit of a cargo hauler, his small hands on controls designed for adult workers. The massive vehicle rumbled to life under his control. Taeyong had been helping his father with the haulers since he was old enough to reach the pedals. He knew how to drive them, how to load them, and how to make them go very, very fast. The Vorthok command ship sat in the middle of the colony's main square like a metal mountain. Its shields were designed to stop military weapons, not heavy industrial equipment moving at maximum speed. Taeyong's cargo hauler, loaded with 20 tons of steel mining equipment, hit the command ship at 100 kilometers per hour. The impact punched through the alien vessel's hull like a hammer through paper. The explosion that followed lit up the sky for kilometers in every direction. When Vorthok reinforcements arrived, they found a scene that shook even their hardened warriors. A 12-year-old human child had single-handedly destroyed their command ship and killed 200 of their soldiers. The idea of juvenile warriors was completely foreign to the Vorthok understanding of warfare. "What kind of species arms there?" "Children," whispered one soldier as they stood in the wreckage. The answer came from a surviving human colonist who emerged from the ruins with her hands raised in surrender. "We don't arm our children," said elderly teacher Myong, her voice steady despite the blood on her clothes. "We just raise them to never give up." The reports from both colonies reached Commander Hugh aboard his flagship as it traveled toward Earth. The human resistance was unexpected and brutal. These were supposed to be soft, weak creatures who would surrender at the first show of force. Instead, they were proving to be something the Vorthok had never encountered before, an enemy that preferred death to defeat. "Sir," said his tactical officer, "perhaps we should revise our intelligence estimates about human capabilities." Huck studied the reports of the mining colony's suicide explosion and the agricultural world's guerrilla warfare. The humans were not fighting like any species the Vorthok had conquered before. They seemed to have no concept of when a battle was lost. "No," he said finally, "these are isolated incidents, desperate actions by a few individuals. When we reach their homeworld and demonstrate our full power, they will surrender like all the others." But deep in his warrior's heart, Hugh felt something he had not experienced in 3,000 years of conquest. Uncertainty. The humans were not behaving according to any logical pattern. They were not acting like a defeated species should act. They were acting like something far more dangerous. They were acting like they had nothing left to lose. As his fleet continued toward the blue-green world that held billions of these strange, stubborn creatures, Commander Huck began to wonder if perhaps the Vorthok Empire had finally encountered something it was not prepared to face. an enemy that simply refused to accept defeat. Captain Jisoo stood on the bridge of the converted passenger liner Golden Dawn, watching as her makeshift fleet moved into position. 3 weeks had passed since the Vorthok invasion began, and the human response had been unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Golden Dawn had been a luxury cruise ship just 1 month ago, taking wealthy passengers on tours of the outer colonies. Now it bristled with weapons hastily welded to its hull, its elegant dining rooms converted into weapon storage, its swimming pools filled with ammunition. Jisoo's crew was a mix of former crew staff, retired military officers, and volunteers, who had never fired a weapon in space before. "Captain, we have 15 Vorthok heavy cruisers approaching from the asteroid belt," reported Lieutenant Changmin from the sensor station. "They're moving in standard attack formation." Jisoo nodded. The Vorthok were predictable in their tactics. They relied on superior firepower and intimidation to win battles. They had never faced an enemy that used converted civilian ships as weapons of war. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Remember, we're not trying to win a fair fight. We're trying to hurt them as much as possible before they hurt us." Her fleet consisted of 47 vessels, none of them proper warships. There were cargo haulers with mining lasers, research vessels with experimental weapons, even a few private yachts whose owners had volunteered to join the fight. Against 15 Vorthok heavy cruisers, it should have been a massacre. But the humans had learned something the Vorthok hadn't expected. They had learned to fight dirty. The first surprise came when the Vorthok fleet entered what they thought was empty space. Hidden among the asteroids, human ships had been waiting for days. The attack came from all directions at once, civilian vessels ramming military ships, converted freighters firing salvos of industrial explosives, research ships using prototype, weapons that had never been tested in combat. Direct hit on the lead cruiser called out Weapons Officer Sang-yoon. "Their shields are down." "All ships, focus fire on the damaged vessel," Jisoo ordered. "Take it down." The Vorthok cruiser disappeared in a ball of fire, but the victory came at a cost. 3 human ships had been destroyed in the ramming attacks, and 2 more were badly damaged. But the humans kept fighting, kept coming, kept refusing to retreat even when the odds were hopeless. On the ground, the battle for the colony world Sunrise had turned into a nightmare for the Vorthok forces. What should have been a simple occupation had become a grinding war of attrition that claimed lives every day. Sergeant Minho crouched behind the ruins of what had been the colony's hospital, checking his rifle's ammunition count. He had been fighting for 2 weeks straight, surviving on little sleep and less food. His left arm was broken, held together by battlefield bandages and determination. 3 of his ribs were cracked from a Vorthok plasma blast that had nearly killed him, but he was still fighting. "Sarge, we've got movement in the north sector," whispered Private Yoonji, pointing toward the burned-out buildings that had once been a shopping district. "Looks like a full company of Vorthok infantry." Minho nodded and signaled to his remaining soldiers. His unit had started with 37 Marines. Now there were 8 of them left, holding a position that military doctrine said required at least 200 soldiers to defend. "Remember the plan," he said quietly. "Let them get close, then hit them with everything we've got. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as possible." The Vorthok soldiers advanced with the confidence of warriors who had conquered 1,000 worlds. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons ready, their armor gleaming. In the light of the burning city, they walked straight into the trap. The explosion came from below. Hidden charges that Minho's unit had placed in the underground tunnels. The blast brought down 3 buildings, crushing dozens of Vorthok soldiers beneath tons of concrete and steel. But it was just the beginning. From the ruins came a hail of gunfire as the remaining Marines opened up with everything they had. Minho's broken arm made it hard to aim, but he kept firing, kept moving, kept fighting even as Vorthok returned fire toward chunks out of the walls around him. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, 200 Vorthok soldiers lay dead, and the unit was down to 3 survivors. The sergeant himself had taken a plasma blast to the chest that should have killed him instantly. Vorthok warrior Vex found him leaning against a broken wall, blood seeping through his combat armor, his weapon still in his hands. "You fought well." "Human," Vex said, his translator making his words understandable. "But your resistance is over. Surrender now, and I will make your death quick." Minho looked up at the towering alien warrior and managed a weak smile. Can't do that, big guy? I've got a daughter back on Earth. Promised her I'd do my best. Vex raised his weapon. Why do you continue to resist? Because that's what we do, Minho replied. We don't give up. We don't quit. We don't surrender. Ever. The Vorthok warrior fired, and Sergeant Minho died with his rifle in his hands and his daughter's name on his lips. But as Vex stood over the human's body, he felt something he had never experienced before. The humans called it guilt, though. He didn't know the word. All he knew was that killing this brave soldier didn't feel like victory. It felt like something had been lost. For the first time in his long career as a warrior, Vex found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, the Vorthok were not the heroes in this story. The reports reached Commander Huck as his fleet approached the outer edge of the Sol system. The human resistance was not breaking. If anything, it was getting stronger. Every battle cost more Vorthok lives. Every victory felt less like triumph and more like survival. Sir, said his communications officer, we're receiving psychological evaluation reports from our ground forces. The medical staff is reporting unusual behavior among our warriors. Hugh frowned. What kind of behavior? Nightmares, sir? Difficulty? Sleeping? Some of our soldiers are reporting that they keep seeing the faces of dead humans in their dreams. The medical staff doesn't understand it. They're calling it some kind of new combat syndrome. The commander stared at the report in disbelief. Vorthok warriors didn't suffer from psychological problems. They were bred for combat, trained from birth to kill without hesitation or regret. The idea that they might be affected by the deaths of their enemies was almost incomprehensible. There's more, sir, the officer continued. Several of our warriors have requested transfers away from human combat zones. They're saying the humans fight like demons. Huck crushed the report in his massive hand. They're soldiers, not demons. They're just a species that hasn't learned when to quit. But even as he said the words, he wondered if maybe that was exactly what made them so dangerous. Species that never learned. When to quit was a species that would never be truly defeated. And as his fleet entered the system that held the human homeworld, Hugh began to realize that the Vorthok Empire might have finally met an enemy that was more dangerous than they were, not because the humans were stronger or more advanced, but because they simply refused to accept that they could lose. The deadliest species in the galaxy was about to discover what it meant to fight an enemy that would rather die than surrender. Admiral Jinho stood in the command center of the Sol Defense Fleet, watching as his forces took their positions around Earth. The planet hung before them like a blue jewel, beautiful and fragile, home to 8 billion human souls who refused to bow to alien conquerors. His fleet was nothing like the ragtag collection of converted civilian ships that had been fighting in the outer colonies. These were humanity's true warships, built in the orbital shipyards above Earth and Mars. Crewed by professional soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this moment, the ships bore names that spoke of human history and values: the Constitution, the Gandhi, the Mandela, the Courage. Each vessel represented not just military might, but the spirit of a species that had spent its entire history fighting for freedom. Sir, long-range sensors are detecting the Vorthok fleet approaching from the edge of the system, reported Commander Yuna from the tactical station. 48 capital ships, plus escorts. They'll be in weapons range in 6 hours. Ginho nodded. The numbers were not in humanity's favor, but numbers had never been what mattered most to his species. Signal all ships, he ordered. Today we show these aliens what happens when they threaten our home. Today they learn why humanity survived every challenge our world threw at us. Today they discover what it means to fight the children of Earth. Far across the system, the Vorthok fleet pressed forward with the confidence of conquerors. They had crushed the outer colonies, scattered the makeshift human fleets, and left a trail of burning worlds behind them. Now only Earth remained. Commander Hugh studied the intelligence reports from the approaching battle zone. The human home fleet was larger than expected, but still smaller than his own forces. Their ships were newer, but Vorthok technology had been proven in battle across the galaxy. Sir, said his tactical officer, our scouts report unusual activity around the human homeworld. There appear to be thousands of civilian vessels moving into defensive positions. Hugh activated the long-range sensors and saw what his officer meant around Earth Cargo ships and passenger liners were forming up alongside the military vessels. Mining ships from the asteroid belt were joining the formation. Even small private craft were taking positions in the defensive grid. "Are they evacuating?" he asked. "No, sir. Intelligence suggests they're joining the fight." The entire human civilian fleet appears to be converging on Earth. For a moment, Hugh was speechless. In 3,000 years of conquest, he had never seen anything like this. Civilian populations usually fled when military forces approached. They didn't join the battle. "How many ships total?" "Estimate over 10,000 vessels." "Sir, most are civilian, but they all appear to be armed." Hugh stared at the tactical display in disbelief. 10,000 ships. The humans were throwing everything they had into this final battle. Not just their military, but their entire spacefaring civilization. As the fleets closed toward each other, individual stories of human determination began to play out across the solar system. Captain Sung led Falcon Squadron, 12 of humanity's most advanced fighters, toward the Vorthok Advance Guard. His pilots were the best of the best, veterans of 100 battles in the outer colonies. They had learned to fight the aliens, learned their weaknesses, learned how to hurt them. "Remember," he said over the squadron communication channel, "they're bigger and stronger, but we're faster and smarter. Use that, work together, watch each other's backs." The human fighters moved like a flock of birds, each pilot knowing instinctively where the others would be. They had trained together for years, flown together, fought together, and in some cases, died together. The bond between them was stronger than any armor. When they engaged the Vorthok fighters, the battle was like a dance. The alien pilots were skilled, and their ships were powerful, but they fought as individuals. The humans fought as one mind with 12 bodies, covering each other, setting up shots for their wingman, sacrificing personal glory for team victory. "Sung, you've got 2 on your tail," called out Lieutenant Minjae. "I see them, Hyun-Soo Kan. You get an angle, already on it. Brake left in 3, 2, 1. The maneuver was perfect. Sung's fighter spun away from his pursuers just as Hyun-Soo came up from below, taking out both Vorthok ships with a perfectly timed burst of fire. This was something the Vorthok had never encountered before. Individual human pilots might not be better than individual Vorthok pilots, but when they worked together, they became something greater than the sum of their parts in the engineering decks of the human fleet. Another kind of battle was being fought. Chief Engineer Nayan worked frantically to modify the weapons systems of the Constitution, pushing human technology beyond its normal limits. "Ma'am, the plasma conduits can't handle this much power," warned Technician Dongwoo. "If we push them any harder, they'll overload. Then we'll build new ones," Nahan replied, her hands flying over the control systems. "The Vorthok expect us to fight with the weapons we have. We're going to fight with the weapons we're building right now." This was the human advantage. The aliens had not anticipated where the Vorthok relied on proven technology and established tactics. Humans adapted. They improvised. They took systems designed for one purpose and used them for something completely different. Mining lasers became anti-ship weapons. Cargo loading systems became missile launchers. Communication arrays became electronic warfare systems. The humans were literally rebuilding their ships in the middle of the battle. But perhaps the most telling moment came when the human destroyer, Defiance, took critical damage from a Vorthok heavy cruiser. The ship was breaking apart, its crew of 200 facing certain death. Instead of abandoning ship, they did something that shocked the Vorthok observers. They turned their dying ship into a weapon. Captain Jegan's last message was heard across both fleets. "This is the Defiance. We're not running, we're not surrendering. We're going to ram that cruiser, and we're going to take it with us. Tell our families we did our duty." The Defiance, its hull cracked and its engines failing, somehow managed to accelerate toward the Vorthok cruiser. The alien ship tried to move away, but it was too late. The human destroyer slammed into its hull at full speed, and both ships disappeared in a massive explosion. But that wasn't the end. Within minutes, 3 more human ships had moved to take the Defiance's position in the battle line. The loss of one ship only made the others fight harder. Vorthok warrior Keth watched this from his battle station and felt something he had never experienced before. Fear, not fear of death, which was an honorable end for any warrior, but fear. of an enemy that turned every defeat into a reason to fight harder. "Sir," he said to his commander, "how do we defeat an enemy that won't stay defeated?" It was a question that would haunt the Vorthok fleet for the rest of the battle, as the main engagement began. Commander Huck found himself facing something unprecedented in Vorthok military history. The humans were not just fighting to win. They were not even fighting to survive. They were fighting because fighting was what they did. It was who they were. Every human who died seemed to make the others stronger. Every ship that was destroyed was immediately replaced by 2 more. Every setback only increased their determination. The Vorthok were facing something they had never encountered in 3,000 years of conquest. They were facing a species that had weaponized hope itself, and as the battle raged around Earth, it became clear that the deadliest species in the galaxy was not the one with the biggest ships or the most advanced weapons. It was the one that simply refused to give up. The battle for Earth had been raging for 18 hours, and Commander Huck was beginning to understand something that terrified him more than any weapon the humans possessed. They were not just fighting for their planet, they were hunting him. Una had been tracking the Vorthok commander's flagship across 3 star systems. Following the trail of destruction it had left behind, her ship, the Relentless, was one of humanity's newest destroyers, fast and deadly. Designed specifically for one purpose, to hunt down the aliens who had murdered her family on the colony world of Haven. "Sir, the Vorthok command ship is trying to escape toward the outer system," reported her tactical officer. "They're running." Una's face was stone. "They can run all they want. We'll follow them to the edge of the galaxy if we have to." This was something the Vorthok had never experienced. Before, in their 3,000 years of conquest, enemies had always tried to escape from them. Now they found themselves being hunted by an enemy that would not give up, would not stop, would not let them rest. The Relentless was not alone. Across the solar system, human ships were pursuing fleeing Vorthok vessels with the patience of persistence. Predators. They would track them for days, for weeks, for months if necessary. They would follow them until their prey was exhausted, until they made a mistake, until they could be destroyed. Commander Huck's communications officer looked up from his station with fear in his eyes. "Sir, that human ship is still following us. They've been tracking us for 6 days now. They're staying just outside weapons range, but they never fall behind." Huck studied the tactical display. The human ship was smaller than his flagship, but it was faster and more maneuverable. Every time he tried to lose it in an asteroid field or behind a moon, it reappeared on his sensors. Every time he tried to turn and fight, it danced away, always staying just out of reach. "They're wearing us down," he realized. "They're not trying to fight us head-on. They're trying to exhaust us." This was the truth about humanity that the Vorthok were finally beginning to understand. Humans were not apex predators because they were the strongest or the fastest. They were apex predators because they were persistence hunters, evolved to chase their prey until it could run no more. On Earth, scientists had known this for centuries. Early humans had hunted massive mammoths and saber-toothed tigers not by overpowering them, but by following them across vast distances until the larger, stronger animals collapsed from exhaustion. Then the humans would move in for the kill. Now, in the vastness of space, they were doing the same thing to the Vorthok Empire. "Sir," said the communications officer, "I'm receiving reports from across the fleet. Every one of our ships is being followed by human vessels. They're not attacking, just following. Our crews are starting to break down from the stress." Hugh looked at the latest medical reports and felt his blood run cold. Vorthok warriors were suffering from what the humans called nervous exhaustion. They couldn't sleep knowing that enemy ships were always just outside their weapons range. They couldn't relax knowing that predators were tracking their every move. For the first time in their history, the Vorthok were experiencing what it felt like to be prey. The psychological impact was devastating. Vorthok soldiers, who had conquered worlds, were now jumping at shadows. Warriors who had faced death without fear were now afraid to look at their sensors, afraid to see the patient human ships that followed them like ghosts. "Sir," said his tactical officer, "perhaps we should consider opening negotiations with the humans. This hunting behavior is not natural. It's not honorable warfare." Huck's mandibles clicked together in frustration. There is no honor in what they're doing. They fight like scavengers, like parasites. They have no concept of proper combat. Even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. The humans had shown tremendous courage in battle. They had fought with skill and determination. They had died for their principles and their people. They were not scavengers. They were something far more dangerous. They were predators who had learned to think. As the days passed, the hunt continued. Human ships pursued Vorthok vessels across the solar system, never attacking unless they had a clear advantage, never giving their prey a chance to rest or regroup. The Vorthok had expected a quick, decisive battle. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a war of attrition that wore down their forces bit by bit. Every day, more of their ships were destroyed or captured. Every day, more of their warriors succumbed to the psychological pressure of being constantly hunted. They're destroying us without fighting, Hugh realized as he studied the casualty reports. They're making us defeat ourselves. This was perhaps the most terrifying revelation of all. The humans understood something about warfare that the Vorthok had never learned. Sometimes the best way to win was not to fight at all, but to make your enemy so afraid of fighting that they destroyed themselves. Captain Una's pursuit of the Vorthok flagship had become legendary among the human fleet. For 2 weeks, she had followed Commander Huck's ship across the outer system, never letting him rest, never allowing him to escape. "Captain," said her communications officer, "the Vorthok ship is transmitting a message. They want to talk." Una looked at the image of the alien commander on her screen. He looked tired, his amber eyes dim with exhaustion. This was the being who had ordered the destruction of her home, who had killed her parents and her younger brother. "What do you want?" she asked. "To understand," Hugh replied. "We have conquered 1,000 worlds, but we have never faced an enemy like you." "What are you?" Una was quiet for a long moment. "We're the species that doesn't know when to quit. We're the species that follows its prey until it falls down from exhaustion. We're the species that turns every defeat into a lesson and every loss into motivation." "But why?" Hugh asked. "Why do you fight so hard for a cause that cannot be won?" "Because it's not about winning," Una replied. "It's about not losing. It's about making sure that everyone who comes after us knows that we never gave up. It's about showing the universe that some things are worth dying for." As she spoke, Huck began to understand the true nature of humanity. They were not just warriors. They were survivors. They were a species that had been forged in the crucible of a dangerous world, shaped by millions of years of struggle and hardship. They were the product of a planet that had tried to kill them at every turn, and they had responded by becoming the most persistent, most adaptable, most determined species the galaxy had ever produced. They were not the deadliest species because they were the strongest. They were the deadliest species because they were the most human. And as the hunt continued, Commander Huck finally understood what the Vorthok Empire had awakened when they had attacked that small blue world. They had awakened something that would never stop coming, never stop fighting, and never stop hunting them until justice was done. They had awakened humanity. The war ended not with a massive battle, but with a simple transmission sent across all frequencies in the Sol system. Commander Hugh's voice, translated into human languages, carried a message that would change the galaxy forever. "This is Commander Hugh of the Vorthok Empire. We surrender." The words echoed through space, reaching every human ship, every listening post, every settlement that had suffered under the alien invasion. For a moment, there was only silence as humanity tried to process what they had just heard. The deadliest species in the galaxy had just admitted defeat. Admiral Jin-Ho sat in his command chair aboard the flagship Constitution, staring at the communication display in disbelief. Around him, his officers waited for orders, unsure how to respond to something that had never happened before in recorded galactic history. "Sir," said Commander Una, "are we accepting their surrender?" Jin-Ho was quiet for a long moment. 3 months of war had cost humanity dearly. Entire colonies had been destroyed. Millions of people had died. Ships and stations that had taken decades to build were now floating debris. But the alternative was to continue the hunt until every ship was destroyed, every warrior killed. And despite everything they had done, Jin-Ho found that he couldn't give that order. "Open a channel to the Vorthok flagship," he said finally. Commander Huck appeared on the main screen, and for the first time the humans could see how the war had changed him. The proud, arrogant warrior who had ordered the massacre of diplomats was gone. In his place was a being who had learned what it meant to be afraid. Why, Jinho asked simply. Hyuk's amber eyes met those of the human admiral. Because we finally understand what we're fighting. You're not just another species to be conquered. You're something we've never encountered before. And what's that? A species that weaponized hope itself. The words hung in the space between the two fleets. Around Earth, thousands of human ships waited for their admiral's decision. Around the Vorthok flagship, the remnants of the once mighty invasion force waited to learn their fate. You killed our diplomats, Ginho said. You destroyed our colonies. You murdered civilians who never hurt anyone. Why should we accept your surrender? Hyuk closed his eyes. Because you're better than we are. Because you fight for something more than conquest. Because even now, after everything we've done, you're still trying to find a way to end this without more killing. It was true, and everyone listening knew it. The humans could have continued the hunt, could have destroyed every Vorthok ship in the system, but they were still looking for a way to stop the killing, still hoping for a solution that didn't require more death. What are your terms? Ginho asked. We have no terms, Hyuk replied. We surrender unconditionally. We will repair the damage we have caused. We will return your people. We will withdraw from human space and never return. We ask only that you allow us to leave with our lives. Admiral Ginho looked around his bridge at the faces of his officers. These were people who had lost friends, family, entire worlds to the Vorthok invasion. They had every right to demand complete destruction of their enemies. Instead, he saw something that made him proud to be human. He saw mercy. Very well, he said. We accept your surrender. But there will be conditions. Over the following weeks, the galaxy watched in amazement as humanity did something unprecedented. Instead of enslaving their defeated enemies or demanding tribute, they offered partnership. The conditions were simple. The Vorthok would help repair the damage they had caused. They would share their knowledge of the galaxy with humanity. And they would work together to build something better than an empire based on conquest. It was former diplomat Minji, rescued from the wreckage of the Harmony, who suggested the name for the new alliance, the Galactic Cooperation Council. It would be an organization based on cooperation rather than domination, on mutual aid rather than conquest. Commander Huck, now serving as the Vorthok representative to the new council, found himself working alongside the very species he had tried to destroy. It was difficult at first. The cultural differences were vast, and the memories of war were still fresh. But slowly, understanding began to grow. I still don't understand how you do it, he said to Mingi during one of their planning sessions. How do you maintain hope in the face of impossible odds? Mingi smiled, and Hyuk was surprised to realize that he found the human expression comforting rather than threatening. Because giving up hope is the only way to truly lose. As long as we keep trying, keep fighting, keep believing that things can get better, then we haven't been defeated. But what if you're wrong? What if things don't get better? Then at least we'll know we tried. At least the next generation will know that we never gave up on them. It was a concept that took the Vorthok months to fully understand. They had always fought for conquest, for dominance, for the glory of victory. The idea of fighting simply, because it was the right thing to do, was foreign to their warrior culture. But gradually, they began to see the wisdom in it. The new alliance grew slowly but steadily. Other species, inspired by humanity's example, began to join the Cooperation Council. The galaxy, which had known only conquest and subjugation for millennia, began to learn about partnership and mutual aid. There were setbacks, of course. Old habits died hard, and there were those on both sides who preferred the simplicity of warfare to the complexity of cooperation. But for every step backward, there were 2 steps forward. 5 years after the end of the war, Hyuk stood in the observation deck of the Harmony II, watching as human and Vorthok engineers worked together to build the first joint colony ship. The vessel would carry settlers from both species to a new world, where they would build something unprecedented, a truly integrated society. Difficult to believe, isn't it? Said a voice behind him. He turned to see Admiral Ginho, now serving as the first human representative to the Galactic Cooperation Council. The human looked older than he had during the war, but there was a peace in his eyes that hadn't been there before. What is difficult to believe? Hyuk asked. That we're here? That we're working together instead of fighting. That we found a way to turn enemies into allies. Hook nodded slowly. Your species continues to surprise me. Even now, after 5 years, I still don't fully understand how you do it. Do what? Turn every defeat into a victory. Turn every ending into a new beginning. Turn every enemy into a... Friend Jinho smiled. It's not magic, Commander. It's just stubbornness. We're too stubborn to accept that things can't get better. We're too stubborn to believe that enemies have to stay enemies forever. We're too stubborn to give up on the idea that the galaxy can be a better place. As they watched the construction work continue, both beings reflected on how much had changed. The Vorthok Empire, which had once conquered half the galaxy through force, was now part of an alliance that was spreading across the stars through cooperation. Humanity, which had been dismissed as a weak and primitive species, had become the driving force behind the greatest peaceful expansion in galactic history. The deadliest species in the galaxy had finally met their match. Not in another predator, but in something far more dangerous, a species that refused to accept that the universe couldn't be made better. And in learning that lesson, both species had discovered something more valuable than conquest or dominance. Had discovered hope. The galaxy would never be the same. In the end, the day the deadliest species in the galaxy finally met humans had become the day the galaxy began to learn that there was something more powerful than the ability to destroy. There was the ability to build, there was the ability to hope, there was the ability to never give up on the dream of something better. And that, more than any weapon or any fleet, was what made humanity truly dangerous. They were dangerous because they made everyone around them want to be better than they were. They were dangerous because they refused to accept that the future had to be the same as the past. They were dangerous because they had weaponized the most powerful force in the universe.